Her trembling hand spoke a language no one expected, and when the shy waitress signed to the Mafia boss's deaf mother, the entire restaurant froze. His mother's eyes filled with joy, but his didn't, because the moment Nancy moved her hands, she unknowingly unlocked a past soaked in blood, and Carlos Marcello's reaction would change both their lives forever. If you're hooked in and want to enjoy this story, go ahead and subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see where everyone's watching. Plus, tomorrow I've got another incredible story lined up, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Alright, back to the story. The chandeliers glittered like frozen stars above La Bella Notte, casting fractured light across crystal glasses and polished silver that cost more than most people's cars. Nancy adjusted her black vest for the third time that evening, her fingers trembling slightly not from the weight of serving New York's criminal elite, but from the exhausting effort of remaining unseen. At 23, Nancy had mastered the art of invisibility, moving through the restaurant like a shadow with a carefully neutral expression. "Table 6 needs their Barolo?" called Marcus, the floor manager, his eyes scanning the dining room with practiced efficiency. "And for God's sake, don't linger near the Marcello party. They value discretion." Nancy nodded, lifting the bottle that cost more than her monthly rent. Marcello. Even the name seemed to carry weight in the hushed dining room. She'd been assigned to his section twice before, and each time she'd felt the dangerous electricity that followed him, the way conversations quieted when he passed, the way even the restaurant's owner stood a little straighter in his presence. The dining room thrummed with the low murmur of people who never checked price tags, who discussed business deals worth millions between sips of wine. Nancy knew the other world intimately, the world of foster homes and second-hand textbooks, of choosing between dinner and the subway fare home. "Miss." The voice was quiet but commanding, with a controlled intensity that made Nancy's pulse spike instinctively. She turned to find Carlos Marcello standing closer than she'd expected, his dark eyes fixed on her with an attention that felt almost physical. He was tall, she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze, with jet-black hair slicked back with precision, and a sharp jawline that suggested both discipline and danger. His tailored suit was unmistakably Italian, and a hint of ink peeked from beneath his crisp white cuff. The small gold hoop in his ear caught the chandelier light. "Your wine, sir," Nancy said softly, her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered. "Not for me." Carlos gestured toward the elegant woman seated at the table behind him, his expression unreadable. "My mother. She's been trying to get someone's attention." Nancy's gaze shifted to the woman, and her heart clenched with recognition. Patricia Marcello was perhaps in her mid-60s, with silver hair swept into an elegant chignon and warm brown eyes that seemed to hold decades of quiet observation. She wore black pearls and a subtle smile, her hands moving in small, tentative gestures that Nancy recognized immediately. Without thinking, Nancy set the wine bottle on the nearest server station and approached Patricia's table, her own hands already moving. "Good evening, ma'am," she signed, her fingers forming the words with practiced grace. "May I assist you?" The transformation on Patricia's face was instant surprise melting into pure delight, her hands responding eagerly. "Oh, how wonderful. I was hoping to ask about the osso buco. Does it come with the traditional gremolata?" The restaurant fell into a hushed stillness around them. Nancy barely noticed. She was too focused on Patricia's animated hands, on the way the older woman's eyes crinkled with laughter as they discussed bone marrow versus traditional preparation. But Carlos Marcello noticed everything. He watched his mother, a woman who'd retreated into dignified silence after years of being overlooked, suddenly animated, laughing, alive in a way he hadn't seen since his father died. And he watched the waitress with the trembling hands and careful posture, the one who'd somehow learned the only language his mother truly spoke. When Nancy finally stepped back, promising to relay Patricia's compliments to the chef, Carlos caught her wrist, not roughly, but with enough intention to stop her. "Where?" he said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that could end careers or lives. "Did you learn to do that?" Nancy looked down at his tattooed hand circling her wrist, then up into eyes that held equal parts suspicion and something that looked almost like wonder. "I had a foster sister," she whispered. "She was deaf. I wanted her to know someone understood her." For 3 heartbeats, Carlos said nothing. Then his grip loosened, though his gaze remained fixed on her face as if committing every detail to memory. "What's your name?" "Nancy. Nancy Rivera." He released her wrist, but the weight of his attention remained. Behind him, Patricia signed something Nancy couldn't quite see. Carlos's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Finish your shift, Nancy Rivera," he said softly. "But we'll talk again." It wasn't a request. If a single act of kindness could melt the heart of a man feared by an entire city, imagine what happens next. Subscribe so you don't miss what this moment is about to ignite. Nancy's hands wouldn't stop shaking during the subway ride home. She pressed them flat against her thighs, watching the darkened tunnel walls blur past the scratched windows, but the tremor remained. Not from fear exactly, though. Carlos Marcello's parting words had certainly embedded themselves like a splinter beneath her skin, but from the memory of Patricia's face, that moment of pure, unguarded joy when someone finally saw her. Nancy knew that feeling intimately. She'd lived it every day for 3 years in the Henderson foster home, watching little Maya struggle to communicate in a world that refused to slow down and listen. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number made her stomach drop. "You did well tonight. C.M." Nancy stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. How did he get her number? She hadn't given it to anyone. But then again, men like Carlos Marcello didn't need permission to find things out. She deleted the message without responding and shoved her phone deep into her bag. The apartment building in Queens greeted her with its familiar smell of cooking oil and old carpet. Nancy climbed the 4 flights to her studio, exhaustion settling into her bones. Inside, the space was small but carefully maintained, books stacked neatly on the windowsill, a single bed with a faded quilt, a hot plate that counted as her kitchen. She heated water for tea and pulled out her linguistics textbook, trying to focus on conjugation patterns she'd need for tomorrow's exam. But Patricia's signed words kept dancing across the page. "You have kind eyes, like my son used to have, before the world hardened him." Nancy hadn't known how to respond to that. She'd only smiled and signed back something about how mothers always see the best in their children. Another buzz, another message. "The tip I left should cover your textbooks. Don't refuse it," my mother insisted. Nancy's breath caught. She checked her bag, pulling out the receipts from tonight's tables. Tucked inside, the Marcello receipt was $500 in crisp bills and a note in elegant cursive. "Thank you for speaking my language. You reminded me what it feels like to be heard. Patricia Marcello." Tears blurred Nancy's vision before she could stop them. She pressed her palm against her mouth, overwhelmed by a kindness she hadn't expected and didn't know how to accept. People like the Marcellos didn't notice people like her. They certainly didn't leave notes that reached into the hollow spaces of her chest and reminded her she was human. She typed back quickly, before she could overthink it. "This is too much. I can't accept this." The response came within seconds. "You can. You will. My mother doesn't offer kindness lightly. Neither do I." Nancy set the phone down, her heart hammering against her ribs. This felt dangerous in a way she couldn't articulate. Not the violence she'd heard whispered about Carlos Marcello, but something more insidious. The danger of being seen, across the city, in a penthouse that overlooked Central Park like a throne overlooking a kingdom. Carlos stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. His mother sat in her favorite chair, embroidery forgotten in her lap, her hands moving in the lamplight. "She's special, that girl. Did you see how naturally she signed? No hesitation, no performative patience. She's spoken with deaf people before." Carlos's jaw tightened. "I know. You had her investigated already, didn't you?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. His mother's expression shifted disappointment, mixed with resignation. She signed slowly, deliberately. "Carlos. She showed me kindness. That's all. Don't make it complicated." "Everything is complicated, Ma." He turned from the window, his voice quiet but edged with something raw. "You were happy tonight. Really happy. I haven't seen that since your father died." Patricia signed, her movements gentle. "I know, my son, but you can't protect me from silence. It's who I am now. You shouldn't have to be isolated in your own family." Patricia stood, crossing to him and placing her hand over his heart. Her signs were small now, intimate. "I'm not isolated. Not anymore. That girl Nancy, she gave me something I thought I'd lost. She reminded me I still have a voice, even if it doesn't make sound. Be kind to her, Carlos. Promise me." Carlos covered his mother's hand with his own, his throat tight. "I promise." But even as he said it, his phone buzzed with a preliminary report from his security team, and the name that appeared in the first line made his blood run cold. Father, Richard Rivera, deceased, former federal court interpreter. Case file, #4782, United States v. Vincent Rossi. Rossi, one of Carlos's former associates, the man who'd betrayed the family 5 years ago. Carlos stared at the screen, his mother's joy from earlier now tainted with the bitter taste of coincidence. Because in his world, there were no coincidences. Only threats he hadn't identified yet. Nancy told herself she wouldn't go back to La Belle Note. She stood outside the restaurant 3 days later, her resignation letter folded in her coat pocket, rehearsing the words she'd say to Marcus. Family emergency. Need to relocate. Thank you for the opportunity. Simple. Clean. A lie that would let her disappear back into the safety of invisibility. But when she pushed through the heavy brass doors, Patricia Marcello was sitting at table 6, afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, turning her silver hair into a halo. Nancy froze. Patricia looked up, and her face transformed with such genuine delight that Nancy's carefully constructed exit strategy crumbled like ash. The older woman's hands moved quickly, excitedly. Nancy, I was hoping you'd be working today. Please, sit with me. Just for a moment. Mrs. Marcello. Nancy glanced toward the empty bar, the kitchen doors. The lunch shift didn't start for another hour. I shouldn't. Please. Patricia signed again, and this time her eyes held something that looked like loneliness. I brought you something. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, Nancy slid into the chair across from Patricia. Up close, she could see the fine lines around the woman's eyes, the elegant way she held herself despite the weight of silence that must press against her daily. Patricia pushed a small wrapped box across the table. Nancy's hands trembled as she opened it, a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, hands forming the sign for friendship. I had it made, Patricia signed, her movements soft. After the other night, I couldn't stop thinking about how rare it is to meet someone who truly listens. Not just hears, but listens with their whole heart. Nancy's throat constricted. Mrs. Marcello, this is too much. The money, now this. Call me Patricia, please. The older woman reached across the table, covering Nancy's hand with her own. And it's not too much. You gave me something priceless. You reminded me I'm still here. Still present. Not just Carlos's deaf mother who needs protecting. The words struck something deep in Nancy's chest. She thought of Maya, her foster sister, how people always spoke around her instead of to her, how they'd turn to Nancy for translation before even trying to communicate themselves. You raised an incredible son, Nancy signed, meaning it. He clearly loves you very much. Patricia's expression flickered pride, mixed with something heavier. He does, but love from my son comes with walls, with guards, with this constant fear that the world will hurt me because of who he is. She paused, her neck signs deliberate. Sometimes I think he forgets I survived worse before he had power. I don't need a fortress. I need connection. Nancy understood that too. The suffocation of being protected until you couldn't breathe. They talked for an hour about Naples, about Patricia's childhood, about the grandmother who first taught her to cook. Patricia's hands danced with stories of sun-drenched coastlines and lemon groves, of a time before tragedy redrew her world into silence. Nancy shared carefully edited pieces of her own past. Foster care, Maya's laughter, the first time she'd successfully signed, I love you, and watched her sister's face light up. She didn't mention the resignation letter burning a hole in her pocket, didn't mention the fear that had kept her awake for 3 nights straight. The front door opened with a gust of October wind. Carlos Marcello stood in the entrance, his dark eyes sweeping the restaurant until they landed on table 6. On his mother, on Nancy. His expression was unreadable as he approached, each step measured and deliberate. Nancy's pulse spiked, her instinct to flee warring with Patricia's warm hand still resting on hers. Carlos, Patricia signed, her movements casual. Nancy and I were just having tea. Join us. Ma. His voice was controlled, but Nancy caught the tension in his jaw. Can I speak with you? Privately. Anything you need to say, you can say in front of Nancy. Carlos's gaze shifted to Nancy, and this time she saw it clearly, suspicion layered beneath the careful neutrality. It's about restaurant business. Then it can wait. Patricia's signs were sharper now, maternal authority cutting through. Sit down, Carlos. Stop looming. For a moment, Nancy thought he'd refuse. But slowly, like a predator deciding whether prey was worth the chase, Carlos pulled out a chair and sat. The air felt charged, electric with unspoken tension. Miss Rivera, he said quietly, his eyes never leaving her face. How long did you say you've worked here? 8 months, Nancy whispered. And before that? What brought you to New York? Patricia's hands moved sharply. Carlos, what are you doing? But Carlos continued as if his mother hadn't signed. Your father, Richard Rivera, he was a court interpreter, wasn't he? Nancy's blood turned to ice. The resignation letter suddenly felt like a confession. She only wanted to help, but kindness just opened the door to a past soaked in blood. Subscribe now and stay with her before the truth hits harder than she can bear. Nancy's apartment felt smaller that night, the walls pressing in like a confession booth with no priest to absolve her. She sat on the edge of her bed, still wearing her coat, staring at her phone as it lit up with another unknown number. The third call in 2 hours. She didn't answer. Couldn't. Not when her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the device. Your father, Richard Rivera, he was a court interpreter, wasn't he? Carlos's question had hung in the air of La Bella Notte like smoke from a gun. Patricia had looked between them, confusion creasing her features, her hands demanding explanations neither of them gave. Nancy had mumbled something about needing to start her shift and fled to the kitchen, where she'd hidden among the steam and the shouting chefs until her breathing returned to normal. But normal was a lie now. Her phone buzzed. Not a call this time, a text from another unfamiliar number. You shouldn't have talked to him. Nancy's stomach dropped. Then another message. Seconds later. You don't know who you're dealing with. Her fingers flew across the screen, typing and deleting responses. Who is this? Seemed naive. Leave me alone. Seemed like an invitation. She settled on silence, but silence felt like surrender. A knock at her door made her jump so violently she nearly dropped the phone. Miss Rivera. The voice through the door was deep, professional, terrifyingly calm. Mr. Marcello would like a word. I'm here to escort you. Nancy pressed her back against the wall, her heart hammering. I'm not going anywhere. He anticipated you'd say that. A pause. He asked me to tell you it's about your safety, not his questions. There's a car outside your building that doesn't belong to us. The words hit like ice water. Nancy moved to her window, carefully pulling back the thin curtain. Sure enough, a black sedan sat across the street, engine running, exhaust ghosting in the October cold. She couldn't see inside, but she felt the weight of watching eyes. Miss Rivera, please. She grabbed her keys with trembling hands and opened the door to find a man in his 40s, built like he'd seen combat and won. His expression was professionally neutral, but his eyes swept her hallway with tactical precision. I'm Marco, Mr. Marcello's head of security. He gestured toward the stairwell. We need to move quickly. The car that took her to Carlos wasn't what Nancy expected. No ostentatious limousine, no tinted windows screaming Mafia drama, just a dark SUV with leather seats and a driver who didn't speak. Marco sat beside her, his presence both comforting and terrifying. Where are we going? Nancy's voice came out smaller than she intended. Somewhere safe. Mr. Marcello will explain. They drove for 20 minutes, leaving Queens behind for the industrial stretches of Brooklyn. When they finally stopped, it was in front of a renovated warehouse, with warm lights spilling from tall windows. Marco opened her door and led her inside, through a coded entrance that beeped acceptance. The interior was nothing like the exterior suggested exposed brick and modern art. Leather furniture arranged around a fireplace that crackled with real flames. And standing by the window, silhouetted against the city lights, was Carlos Marcello. He turned when she entered, and Nancy saw something different in his expression. Not suspicion this time. Concern. Thank you, Marco. Wait outside. When they were alone, the silence stretched taut as wire. Carlos moved to a side table and poured amber liquid into 2 glasses. He offered her one. Nancy shook her head. You should sit, he said quietly. I'd rather stand. Her voice found strength from somewhere. Who's watching my apartment? What do you want from me? Carlos took a slow sip, his dark eyes never leaving her face. Your father testified against Vincent Rossi 5 years ago. Rossi was one of my associates. He went to prison because of that testimony and died there 3 months later. Heart attack, officially. But his brother, Nico, never believed it was natural causes. Nancy's legs suddenly felt weak. She sank into the nearest chair. Nico Rossi has been quiet since his brother's death. Building power, waiting. Carlos set his glass down with deliberate care. 2 days ago, one of my informants heard your name mentioned in connection with his organization. They've been watching you, Miss Rivera, trying to figure out if you're connected to me or just a coincidence. I'm not connected to you, Nancy whispered. You became connected the moment you signed to my mother. His voice was flat, stating facts. You became visible. In my world, Visible means vulnerable. Nancy's chest tightened. So what? You're here to warn me? To threaten me to stay away from Patricia? Something flickered across Carlos's face. Surprise. Maybe even hurt. No. I'm here to protect you. Why? The question burst out of her. Why would you protect me? Carlos moved closer, crouching until they were eye level. His voice dropped to something almost gentle. Because you made my mother laugh for the first time in 3 years. Because you didn't ask for anything in return. Because you're in danger, because of a kindness you showed. He paused. And because my mother would never forgive me if I let something happen to you. Nancy's phone buzzed in her pocket. Another message. Last warning. Walk away. Carlos's expression hardened. Let me see that. Against her better judgment, Nancy handed him the phone. She watched his jaw clench as he read, watched something dangerous slide behind his eyes like a blade finding its sheath. You're not going back to that apartment tonight, he said, his voice carrying the weight of a command that expected no argument. Marco will take you somewhere secure. Tomorrow, we'll figure out how to end this. End what, exactly? Carlos looked at her, and for the first time, Nancy saw past the careful control to the man beneath someone who carried the weight of protection like a penance. The threat. Before it gets anywhere near you or my mother. Nancy should have been terrified, should have run, but as she looked into Carlos Marcello's eyes, all she felt was the strange, impossible certainty that she was safer with a mafia boss than she'd been in months of invisibility. Even if safety came wrapped in danger she couldn't yet see. The safe house was a brownstone in Park Slope, elegant and unassuming, the kind of place where neighbors minded their business and asked no questions. Nancy barely slept. She spent the night curled on a leather sofa, watching shadows move across unfamiliar walls, her mind replaying Carlos's words on an endless loop. You're in danger because of a kindness you showed. How did compassion become a crime? How did signing to a lonely woman paint a target on her back? When dawn finally bled through the curtains, her phone buzzed with a message from Patricia. Please come to my home today. For tea. I need to show you something. Carlos doesn't need to know. Nancy stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. Every rational instinct screamed to refuse. But there was something in those words Carlos doesn't need to know that spoke of secrets and trust and a woman tired of being protected into isolation. She typed back, when? Patricia's home was not what Nancy expected. No fortress, no armed guards at every corner, just a graceful mansion in Scarsdale with gardens that whispered of old money and older grief. A housekeeper led Nancy through rooms filled with afternoon sunlight and the scent of jasmine, to a conservatory where Patricia sat among orchids and books. The older woman's face lit up when Nancy entered, her hands moving in welcome. You came. I wasn't sure you would after yesterday. Nancy sat across from her, the glass walls revealing a garden that seemed designed for contemplation. Mrs. Marcello, Patricia Carlos said, I'm in danger. That people are watching me because I spoke to you. Patricia's expression tightened, something like anger flashing across her features. My son sees danger in every shadow. It's how he's survived. But sometimes his protection becomes a prison. She paused, her neck signed slower. I asked you here because I need to show you something. Something Carlos doesn't know I've kept. She reached beneath her chair and pulled out a leather journal, worn at the edges, pages thick with age. When she opened it, Nancy saw pages of handwritten notes and sketched hand positions, sign language but encoded, disguised as artistic drawings. After my husband died, Carlos tried to shield me from everything. The business, the violence, the truth. But I'm not fragile, Nancy. I'm deaf, not blind. Patricia's signs were sharp now, precise. I've been watching, recording. There are things happening in my son's organization that he doesn't see, because he's too busy protecting me to notice I'm protecting him. Nancy's breath caught. You've been spying? I've been surviving. Patricia turned pages, revealing dates, names, coded messages in sign language shorthand. There's a man, Luca Moretti, Carlos's lieutenant. He's been coming here for years, always kind, always attentive. But 6 months ago, something changed. The way he watched me, like he was waiting for something. She pointed to a series of sketches, hand positions that Nancy slowly translated. Trust no one. The wine remembers. Family bleeds from within. What does that mean? Nancy whispered. Patricia's hands trembled slightly as she signed. My husband's family owned a vineyard before Prohibition. They used it to smuggle wine, then whiskey. After the repeal, it became a place to hide things. Documents, money, people. She met Nancy's eyes. Bodies, when necessary. Carlos doesn't know I remember where it is. He thinks I've forgotten everything from before my hearing loss. Nancy's mind raced. Why are you showing me this? Because I trust you. Patricia's signs were gentle now, maternal. Because when you signed to me in that restaurant, you didn't see a mafia boss's mother or a disabled woman to pity. You saw me, just Patricia. Tears welled in her eyes. And because I'm afraid, Nancy. Afraid that whatever Luca is planning involves using me to hurt Carlos. And if something happens to me, I need someone to understand what these messages mean. Before Nancy could respond, the sound of tires on gravel cut through the quiet. Patricia's expression shifted to alarm. She grabbed the journal and pressed it into Nancy's hands. Hide this. Quickly. Nancy shoved the journal into her bag just as footsteps echoed down the hallway. Carlos appeared in the conservatory entrance, his expression thunderous. What the hell are you doing here? His voice was cold, controlled fury. Marco said you left the safe house, alone. Patricia stood, her hands moving sharply. I invited her. This is my home, Carlos. I don't need permission to have tea with a friend. A friend? Carlos's laugh was harsh. Ma, she's... He stopped himself, jaw clenched. His eyes shifted to Nancy. Do you have any idea what risk you took coming here? The Rossi family could have followed you. Could have what? Nancy found her voice, surprising herself with its steadiness. Could have hurt your mother? She was already at risk, Carlos. She's been at risk for years, while you've been so busy building walls around her that you haven't noticed she's been watching the threats from inside them. The silence that followed was deafening. Carlos stared at Nancy like she'd slapped him. Patricia's hands moved gently. She's right, my son. You protect me so fiercely you've forgotten to listen to me. Something cracked in Carlos's expression, pain mixing with the anger. I listen to you. No, you watch me. You guard me. But you don't hear what I'm trying to tell you. Nancy's phone buzzed. Another message. This time, she looked at it before anyone could stop her. Pretty house, pretty garden, pretty targets, both of you. The blood drained from her face. Carlos was beside her instantly, reading the screen over her shoulder. His entire body went rigid. Luca, he said quietly, almost to himself. Then louder, sharper. Marco, get a team here now. Full perimeter. No one in or out. He turned to Nancy, and for the first time she saw real fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for what he might lose. Whatever my mother told you, he said, his voice rough. Whatever she showed you, it stays between us. Understand? Nancy nodded, her hand instinctively gripping her bag where Patricia's journal lay hidden. Outside, through the glass walls, Nancy saw movement in the garden, a shadow that didn't belong, and she realized with cold certainty that the danger Carlos had warned her about wasn't coming. It was already here. The charity gala at the plaza was everything Nancy had never been invited to. Crystal chandeliers that cost more than houses, champagne that flowed like water, and people draped in jewelry that could fund small countries. She stood beside Patricia in a borrowed black dress, feeling like an imposter among predators in designer clothing. But Patricia had insisted. I need you there. She'd signed that morning. I need someone who actually sees me, not just my son's power. Carlos had argued. For an hour, his voice rising and falling in controlled anger while Patricia's hands moved with equal force. But in the end, maternal will had won. Nancy would attend with Marco shadowing her every step, and 3 additional security personnel blending into the crowd. You look terrified, Carlos said quietly, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of champagne. He offered her one. Don't be. Half these people are more dangerous with their contracts than I am with a gun, and you're handling it better than they would in your world. Nancy took the glass, if only to have something to hold. Your world isn't exactly known for its comfort. No. His dark eyes swept the ballroom with practiced assessment. But it's honest about what it is. These people? He gestured subtly toward a senator laughing with a real estate mogul. They pretend their violence is civilized because they sign it into law or bury it in fine print. Before Nancy could respond, Patricia appeared, radiant in midnight blue, her hands moving excitedly about the auction items. A Monet sketch, vintage wines, a weekend in Tuscany. She pulled Nancy toward the display tables, leaving Carlos to navigate conversations with men whose smiles never reached their eyes. Nancy relaxed slightly in Patricia's presence, translating her observations about the other attendees' fashion choices and the overwrought floral arrangements. For a moment, Surrounded by beauty and Patricia's warmth, Nancy almost forgot the journal hidden in her apartment safe, almost forgot the coded warnings and the shadow in the garden that had vanished before Carlos's team could investigate. Almost. Ladies and gentlemen, a voice boomed over the speaker system. The auction will begin in 15 minutes. Please make your way to the grand ballroom. The crowd shifted, flowing like a well-dressed tide. Nancy turned to find Patricia. She was gone. Nancy's heart stuttered. She'd been right there, just seconds ago, admiring a diamond necklace by the auction table. Nancy pushed through the crowd, searching for silver hair and midnight blue. Patricia? Marco appeared at her elbow. Where is she? I don't know. She was right here. Carlos materialized from the crowd, his expression shifting from composed to lethal in an instant. What do you mean you don't know? She was beside me, and then, Nancy's voice broke. Carlos, she was right here. He was already moving, phone to his ear, barking orders in a voice that made nearby guests step back instinctively. Marco and 2 other men fanned out, speaking into discreet earpieces. The gala continued around them, oblivious to the storm gathering at its center. Nancy's phone buzzed. The message was a video file. Her hands shook so badly she could barely press play. The footage showed Patricia in what looked like a storage room, wrists bound to a chair, fear and fury warring in her eyes. No sound, just Patricia's face, and then her hands moving, signing. Nancy's breath stopped. Carlos. Carlos. He was beside her instantly, his face draining of color as he watched his mother on the screen. What is she saying? Nancy's mind raced, translating the rapid signs. Patricia's hands moved with deliberate precision, knowing someone would need to interpret. Trust no one. The wine remembers. Luca. The video cut off. What about Luca? Carlos's voice was deadly quiet. Before Nancy could answer, Luca Moretti himself appeared through the crowd, his expression concerned, his jacket perfectly pressed. Carlos, what's wrong? I heard your mother. Where is she? Carlos's hand shot out, gripping Luca's collar with barely controlled violence. Where the fuck is my mother? Luca's eyes widened. I don't know. I've been coordinating with hotel security. They're checking the footage. The wine remembers, Nancy said quietly, the words falling like stones. That's what Patricia signed. The wine remembers. Luca's face flickered just for a microsecond, but Nancy saw it. Recognition. Fear. And then the mask slipped back into place. What does that mean? Luca asked, his voice carefully confused. But Carlos was already staring at him with new eyes, the kind of look that preceded violence. The vineyard. The old family vineyard. His grip tightened on Luca's collar. You sent men there. When? Carlos, I don't. When? The roar made nearby guests turn, finally registering that something was wrong. Luca's hand moved toward his jacket. Marco's gun was faster, pressed against Luca's ribs before he could reach whatever weapon he'd hidden. Don't, Marco said quietly. Nancy's phone buzzed again. Another message, this time with GPS coordinates and a single line of text. You have 2 hours. Come alone, or she dies. Bring the journal. Carlos snatched the phone from her hand, reading the message with eyes that had gone cold as winter. What journal? Nancy's mouth went dry. The one Patricia gave me, with the codes, the signs, everything she'd been recording about my organization. Carlos's voice was flat. My mother's been keeping records, and you didn't tell me. She asked me not to, she asked you not to, and now someone's using it to leverage her life. Each word was precisely enunciated, controlled rage barely contained. Who else knows about this journal, Nancy? No one. Just Patricia and me. Then how? Carlos stopped, his eyes shifting back to Luca, who'd gone very still in Marco's grip. You've been in my mother's house for years, watching her, waiting for her to slip up and reveal something useful. Luca said nothing, but his silence was confession enough. Carlos's next words were spoken with the kind of cold certainty that preceded executions. Marco, secure him. Separate location. His eyes never left Luca's face. We'll deal with him after I get my mother back. As Marco dragged Luca toward a service exit, Carlos turned to Nancy. The ballroom continued its oblivious celebration around them, a orchestra playing Vivaldi while a woman's life hung in the balance. The journal, Carlos said quietly. Where is it? My apartment. In the safe. Then we're going to get it. And then, his jaw clenched. Then you're going to help me understand every code my mother wrote. Because if someone wants that journal badly enough to take her, It means there's something in those pages worth killing for. Nancy nodded, her hands instinctively moving in sign language. I won't let anything happen to her. Carlos stared at her signing, something shifting in his expression. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. You can't promise that. Watch me, Nancy signed. And despite everything, the danger, the betrayal, the ticking clock counting down to violence, Carlos Marcello almost smiled. God help anyone who underestimates you, Nancy Rivera. The ballroom lights dimmed. The auction began. And somewhere in the darkness, Patricia Marcello waited, her silence the only weapon she had left. Someone's mother has vanished, and only silence holds the map. Don't blink, subscribe right now so you don't miss the sign that could save her life. The drive to the vineyard was 3 hours of suffocating silence, broken only by the hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional crackle of Marco's radio from the SUV behind them. Nancy sat in the passenger seat of Carlos's car, the leather journal open in her lap, her fingers tracing Patricia's coded signs by the glow of her phone's flashlight. Each page revealed fragments of a woman who'd been watching, recording, protecting her son from threats he couldn't see because he was too busy protecting her. Luca met with unknown associate, October 3rd, spoke of debt owed and old blood. December 15th, Luca asked about the vineyard, claimed nostalgia, eyes said otherwise. February 22nd, someone is coming. I can feel it in the way my son's men look at each other, like they're keeping secrets even from him. She knew. Nancy's voice cracked the silence. She knew something was wrong for months. Carlos's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his jaw a rigid line in the dashboard's green glow. She should have told me. Would you have believed her? Nancy turned to look at him. Or would you have thought she was confused? Fragile? In need of more protection? The muscle in his jaw jumped, but he said nothing, because they both knew the answer. Nancy returned to the journal, flipping to the final entries. Her breath caught. Carlos. The last page. He glanced over as she held it up. Patricia had drawn a detailed map, the vineyard's layout, with specific markings, a wine cellar, underground tunnels, and in the corner, a phrase that made Nancy's blood run cold. If you're reading this without me, I'm already where the wine sleeps. Find me before Luca finds what he's really looking for, the Rossi ledger. Your father hid it there 20 years ago. It names everyone, including the family traitor who helped kill him. Carlos's foot slammed on the brake. The car screeched to a stop on the empty highway, Marco's SUV barely stopping in time behind them. What did you say? His voice was hoarse, dangerous. Nancy read it again, slower, her hands translating the coded signs she'd been too rushed to fully interpret before. Your mother says your father hid a ledger at the vineyard. Something about the Rossi family and a traitor who helped kill him. My father died of a heart attack. But Carlos's voice wavered, the certainty crumbling. He, the doctors said, what if they were wrong? Nancy touched his arm gently. What if Patricia's been trying to tell you for years, and everyone, including you, dismissed her because she couldn't speak? Carlos stared through the windshield at the darkness ahead, his breathing uneven. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. If that's true, if someone killed him and has been hiding in my organization for 20 years, then Patricia isn't just bait. Nancy finished. She's the only witness who remembers, and that ledger is the proof. Carlos pulled out his phone, dialing Marco. Change of plans. When we get there, your priority is my mother. Not the journal, not the ledger. Her. Understood? Yes, sir. He hung up and turned to Nancy, his dark eyes searching her face. You don't have to come with us. I can have Marco take you back to the city. Keep you safe. No. Nancy's voice was steady, surprising herself. Patricia asked me to understand these messages, to be her voice if something happened. I'm not leaving her now. Something shifted in Carlos's expression, respect, maybe even tenderness. You're either very brave or very foolish. Can't I be both? Despite everything, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. My mother would like that answer. He pulled back onto the highway, driving faster now. The vineyard waited ahead, somewhere in the Hudson Valley darkness, a place of old family secrets and older betrayals. Nancy studied the map again, memorizing the cellar's location, the tunnel entrances. The wine remembers, she murmured. That's what Patricia kept signing. The wine remembers. It's what my grandmother used to say. Carlos's voice was distant, lost in memory. She'd tell me stories about prohibition, about hiding bottles in the walls, about how wine holds the truth of the soil it came from. She said secrets were like wine buried in darkness. They only got stronger. Nancy looked at him, seeing past the Mafia boss to the boy who'd lost his father and never knew why. "We'll find her, Carlos. We'll find them both, Patricia and the truth." He didn't answer, but his hand reached across the console, finding hers, squeezing once a moment of vulnerability from a man who couldn't afford weakness. They drove on through the darkness, two people bound by sign language and circumstance, racing toward a vineyard where the past and present were about to collide. The vineyard appeared like a ghost from another era, overgrown vines choking ancient trellises, a stone manor house dark against the moonlit sky, and everywhere, the sweet-rot smell of fermentation gone wild. Carlos killed the headlights, coasting the last 100 yards on momentum alone. Marco's SUV followed suit. They parked behind a collapsed barn, and within seconds, Carlos's men emerged, 6 shadows armed with suppressed weapons and tactical gear. Nancy felt absurdly unprepared in her borrowed gala dress and flats. The journal clutched against her chest like armor. "Marco, east entrance. Giovanni, take the perimeter. No one leaves." Carlos loaded his own weapon with practiced efficiency. "And remember, my mother comes out alive. Whatever else happens, she comes out alive." The men dispersed into darkness. Carlos turned to Nancy. "Stay behind me. Don't speak unless I tell you to. And if I say run." "I know. I run." Nancy lifted her chin. "But I won't need to. Because we're getting Patricia out of there." Carlos studied her face in the moonlight, and Nancy saw the war happening behind his eyes, the need to protect warring with the knowledge that he needed her. That Patricia needed her. "The cellar entrance is on the south side," Nancy said, pointing to where Patricia's map indicated. "If they're holding her where the wine sleeps, that's where we start." They moved through the vineyard like ghosts themselves, Nancy following Carlos's shadow, her heart hammering so loud she was certain it would give them away. The cellar doors were old wood, chained but not locked, an invitation or a trap. Nancy couldn't tell which. Carlos cut through the chain with bolt cutters, the sound impossibly loud in the night silence. The doors opened on rusted hinges, revealing stone steps descending into absolute darkness. Nancy pulled out her phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam illuminated wine racks stretching into shadows, most bottles gone, those remaining thick with decades of dust. And at the far end, a flicker of light. Candlelight. Carlos moved down the steps, weapon raised. Nancy followed, her breath shallow, every sense heightened. The smell of old wine and damp stone, the sound of their footsteps echoing off walls that had witnessed generations of secrets. They reached the bottom. The cellar opened into a larger chamber, and there, in the candlelit center, Patricia, bound to a chair, gagged, her eyes wide with fear and relief and warning all at once. Her hands were trying to move, fingers straining against the ropes. "Ma!" Carlos started forward. "I wouldn't." The voice came from the shadows. A man stepped into the candlelight, not Luca, but someone older, with Rossi family eyes, Nico Rossi himself, and he was holding a gun pointed directly at Patricia's head. "Hello, Carlos. It's been a long time." Nico's smile was cold. "Your mother and I have been having such an interesting conversation. Well, she can't talk, of course, but her hands." He laughed. "Her hands have been very expressive." Nancy's entire body went rigid. She watched Patricia's fingers, still moving despite the bonds. Signing. Desperate, rapid signs that Nico couldn't understand, but Nancy could. Behind the wall, ledger, third rack, run. Nancy's eyes found Carlos's. He'd seen it too, the message meant for them alone. "What do you want, Rossi?" Carlos's voice was deadly calm, his weapon trained on Nico. "What I've always wanted, justice for my brother. And the ledger your father kept, the one that proves your family wasn't the only one dealing with the feds." Nico pressed the gun harder against Patricia's temple, making her wince. "The one that shows a Marcello was the real rat." The words detonated in the cellar like a grenade. Carlos's weapon never wavered, but Nancy saw the fracture in his composure. "You're lying." "Am I?" Nico gestured to the wine racks. "It's here somewhere. Your father's insurance policy. And when I find it, the whole city will know the truth, that the Marcello Empire was built on betrayal." Patricia's hands moved again. "Don't believe him. Trap. Explosives." Nancy's blood turned to ice. She scanned the cellar, seeing it now wires running along the baseboards, barely visible in the candlelight. This wasn't just a kidnapping. It was an execution chamber, and they'd walked right into it. Time crystallized into fractured moments, Patricia's terrified eyes, the gun pressed to her temple, the barely visible wires snaking along the ancient cellar walls like veins of death. Nancy's mind raced, translating Patricia's frantic signs even as Nico Rossi monologued about revenge and justice and blood debts that could never be repaid. Left door, now. When he looks at Carlos. Nancy caught Carlos's eye, her hands moving subtly at her sides, spelling out Patricia's message in abbreviated signs. His jaw tightened imperceptibly, acknowledgement without reaction. You know what's funny, Marcelo? Nico's voice echoed off stone walls. Your mother knew the truth all along, watched it happen, saw who really betrayed your father, but no one ever thought to ask the deaf woman. Did they? She was just furniture, decorative and silent. Shut your mouth. Carlos's voice was ice over magma. Or what, you'll shoot me and the explosives detonate, killing us all? Nico laughed. I've got a dead man's switch in my pocket. The second my heart stops, this whole cellar becomes a tomb. So lower your weapon, Carlos, or watch your mother's head. The cellar door behind them burst open. Marco and two men flooded in, weapons raised. Nico's attention snapped toward them for a split second, just one heartbeat of distraction. Patricia moved. Despite the bonds, despite the gun, she threw her weight sideways, tipping the chair. Nico's shot went wild, sparking off stone. Carlos fired twice center mass, and Nico crumpled backward. The switch! Nancy screamed. The dead man's switch! Carlos dove for Nico's falling body, his hand shooting into the dead man's pocket. He pulled out a device, black plastic, red button, Nico's thumb still depressing it even in death. Carlos held it down, his entire body rigid. Get her out, he said quietly, deadly calm despite the bomb he was literally holding. Marco, get my mother out, now. Marco was already cutting Patricia's bonds. She collapsed into his arms, shaking, her hands moving in rapid-fire signs that Nancy translated even as her own voice trembled. She says there are more men outside. Luca's with them. This was a distraction there after the ledger while you're trapped down here. Carlos's dark eyes met his mother's. A lifetime of communication passed between them in that look, apologies and love and the fierce protectiveness that had always bound them. Marco, take her through the tunnel. The old escape route behind the third wine rack. Ma showed it to me when I was a kid. His voice was steady, but Nancy saw the tension in every line of his body. Nancy goes with you. No. Nancy's voice surprised even herself. If there are men upstairs looking for the ledger, they need to think they're succeeding. We need a distraction. Nancy, Carlos started. Your mother says the ledger is behind the wall. Third rack. Nancy was already moving, her hands running over the ancient stone. If I can find it first, if they see me running with it, they'll kill you. Or they'll chase me and give your men time to get Patricia to safety. Nancy's fingers found a loose stone, pulled. The section of wall swung inward, revealing a hollow space. And there, wrapped in oilcloth, was a leather-bound book that held 20 years of secrets. She grabbed it, turning back to Carlos. Their eyes met across the cellar, and something passed between them. Understanding, respect. Something deeper that neither had time to name. Nancy Rivera, Carlos said quietly. You are either the bravest or the most reckless woman I've ever met. Your mother would say both. Nancy clutched the ledger. How long can you hold that switch? Long enough. There's a manual override, I can feel it. But I need everyone clear first. Patricia's hands moved frantically. Marco translated. She says she won't leave you. Ma. Carlos's voice cracked, just slightly. Please, let me protect you this one time. Let me do this right. Tears streamed down Patricia's face, but she nodded. Marco lifted her, carrying her toward the hidden tunnel entrance. Nancy started for the stairs, the ledger burning in her hands like stolen fire. Nancy. Carlos's voice stopped her. The left tunnel, not the stairs. It opens near the barn. You'll have a head start. What about you? I'll be right behind you, I promise. His smile was almost gentle. Go be visible, Nancy. Save my mother. Save us all with that voice of yours. Nancy ran. The tunnel was barely wider than her shoulders, carved from earth and reinforced with rotting timbers that rained dirt with every step. Nancy's phone flashlight carved a weak path through absolute darkness. Behind her, she heard shouts Luca's voice. She was certain calling out to search the cellar. The tunnel forked, left or right. Patricia's map hadn't shown this. Nancy chose left on instinct, praying it was correct. The passage opened suddenly into night air and chaos. Gunfire crackled. Marco and his men had engaged Luca's forces near the manor house. In the confusion, Nancy saw Patricia being pushed into an SUV, saw Marco return fire with one hand while shielding her with his body. "There!" Luca's voice sharp with triumph. "The waitress has the ledger." Nancy ran. Not toward the cars, but into the vineyard itself, into the labyrinth of overgrown vines and collapsed trellises. She heard footsteps behind her, multiple men, crashing through the undergrowth. Her dress caught on thorns, tearing. Her flats offered no protection against stones and broken glass. But she ran, the ledger pressed against her chest, Patricia's coded warnings echoing in her mind. A hand grabbed her arm, spinning her around. Luca Moretti stood before her, gun raised, his handsome face twisted with rage and desperation. "Give it to me." "No." Nancy's voice was stronger than she felt. "You stupid girl. You have no idea what's in that book, what it means." He stepped closer, the gun barrel inches from her chest. "The names in there, they're not just criminals. They're senators, judges, cops. People who can't afford for that ledger to see daylight. Give it to me, and I'll let you walk away." "Liar." Nancy's hands moved instinctively, signing the word even as she spoke it. "You were always going to kill me. Kill Patricia. Everyone who knew the truth." Luca's expression hardened. "Then I'll make it quick." The gunshot came from behind Nancy. Luca's expression went blank with shock. He looked down at the red blooming across his chest, then crumpled into the vines. Nancy spun. Carlos stood 20 feet away, his weapon still raised, his other hand empty. The dead man's switch deactivated or disarmed, she didn't know which. His face was a mask of cold fury. "Did he hurt you?" Carlos's voice was gentle despite the violence still echoing in the air. Nancy shook her head, unable to speak. Carlos closed the distance between them, his hand cupping her face with surprising tenderness. "You ran, just like I told you to." "I ran toward the danger." Nancy's laugh was slightly hysterical. "Your mother was right. I am both brave and foolish." "My mother," Carlos said quietly, "is safe." Marco got her out. The explosives were a bluff, cheap fireworks rigged to look dangerous. Rossi was always more talk than action. Nancy sagged against him, adrenaline draining away, leaving only exhaustion. "The ledger. Can wait." Carlos took it from her trembling hands. "You've done enough, Nancy Rivera, more than anyone had a right to ask." In the distance, sirens wailed. Carlos's men melting into the shadows, cleanup protocols already in motion. The vineyard would tell no tales except the ones Carlos wanted told. "What happens now?" Nancy whispered. Carlos looked down at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, his expression was completely unguarded, grateful, awed, and something else that made her heart skip. "Now," he said softly, "you let me thank you properly. You let my mother thank you. And then," he paused, "then we figure out what the hell we do with a woman who's too brave for her own good and too important to let go." Nancy stared up at him. "Important. You saved my mother's life. Risked your own. Used silence as a weapon when everyone else was shouting." His thumb brushed her cheek. "Yes, Nancy. Important. Essential, actually. Somewhere in the ruins of the vineyard, where old secrets had been buried and new truths unearthed, Nancy Rivera, the invisible waitress, finally understood what it meant to be seen. Not as a tool or a pawn or a problem to be solved, but as someone worth protecting, worth saving, worth everything. The hospital room was too white, too sterile, smelling of antiseptic and the particular silence that comes after violence. Carlos woke to fluorescent lights and the steady beep of monitors, his chest wrapped in bandages, pain radiating through his left shoulder where the bullet had torn through muscle and bone. He'd taken the shot meant for Nancy, dove in front of her when one of Luca's men emerged from the vineyard shadows for one final act of vengeance. The last thing he remembered was Nancy's scream and the feeling of falling. Now, blinking against the harsh light, he turned his head and found her. Nancy sat in the chair beside his bed, head tilted back against the wall, asleep. Her borrowed gala dress was ruined, torn, stained with dirt and his blood. Her hair had fallen from its elegant pins. She looked exhausted and beautiful and utterly out of place in his violent world. But she was there. His movement must have woken her because her eyes fluttered open, immediately focusing on him with an intensity that made his breath catch. "Carlos." Her voice cracked with relief. She leaned forward, her hand finding his uninjured one. "You're awake. The doctors said they weren't sure if..." "How long?" His voice was rough, unused. 18 hours. They had to do surgery, remove the bullet. It was close to your subclavian artery, another inch, and she stopped, pressing her free hand to her mouth. Carlos squeezed her fingers gently. But it wasn't. I'm fine. You're not fine. You took a bullet for me. You almost died because you... Tears spilled down her cheeks. The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither was quite ready to examine. Carlos looked at their joined hands, at the contrast of her small fingers against his scarred knuckles. Because my mother would never forgive me if I let something happen to you, he said quietly. Then, softer. And I would never forgive myself. The door opened before Nancy could respond. Patricia swept in like a force of nature, her silver hair perfect, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She moved straight to Carlos's bedside, her hands flying in rapid signs. Nancy translated, her voice thick with emotion. She says you're an idiot, a brave, stupid, wonderful idiot, and she loves you more than all the stars in all the skies. Carlos's throat tightened. He signed back, his movements clumsy with exhaustion. I love you too, Ma. I'm sorry I didn't listen sooner. Patricia's hand cupped his face, gentle and firm at once. Then she turned to Nancy, her signs slower, deliberate. She says, Nancy's voice broke. She says thank you, for being her voice when she couldn't speak, for seeing her when everyone else looked through her, for saving her son's life by being exactly who you are. Nancy shook her head. I didn't save anyone. I just... Patricia's hands moved sharply, commanding attention. Nancy watched, translating even as tears continued to fall. She says you did save them. All of them. That the ledger you recovered proves Luca was working with the Rossi family for years, feeding them information, planning the long game, that your bravery exposed a rot that could have destroyed everything. Nancy paused, reading Patricia's next signs. And that she wants you to stay. Not just for now, for as long as you'll have them. Carlos watched Nancy's face as she absorbed his mother's words, saw the war happening behind her eyes, fear and hope, and the terrifying possibility of belonging. Patricia, Nancy started. The door burst open again. Marco entered, holding a tablet, his expression grim but satisfied. Boss, you need to see this. Carlos struggled to sit up, pain lancing through his shoulder. Nancy immediately moved to help, adjusting his pillows with gentle efficiency. Marco handed him the tablet. Security footage from the vineyard. The timestamp showed earlier that night, during the chaos. And there, clear as day, was Luca meeting with Nico Rossi, handing over documents, receiving payment, but more damning was the audio Marco played next Luca's voice. Recorded weeks ago. The old man had to die. He was getting soft, talking about going legitimate. The Rossi family paid well for that heart attack, and when the time comes, his son will die too. I'll make sure of it. The words hung in the sterile air like poison. Carlos's face went blank, the kind of emptiness that preceded volcanic rage. My father. Luca killed my father. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth, her signs frantic. Nancy translated through her own shock. She suspected. All these years, she suspected but had no proof. That's why she started keeping the journal, why she was so afraid of Luca. He was in my house. Carlos's voice was deadly quiet. At my table, acting like family while he plotted to destroy everything my father built, while he planned to kill my mother. Marco's expression was carved from stone. He's alive, boss. Barely. In custody. Singing like a canary about everyone he worked with Rossi connections. Dirty cops. All of it. The ledger confirms everything he's saying. I want to see him. Carlos started to push himself up, ignoring the pain. Carlos, no. Nancy's hand pressed gently against his chest. You're in no condition. I need to look him in the eye. I need him to know. He already knows. Nancy's voice was soft but firm. He knows he failed. That you survived. That Patricia survived. That everything he worked for collapsed because he underestimated a deaf woman and a waitress who refused to stay invisible. Her words pierced through his rage, finding something deeper. Carlos sank back against the pillows, his hand covering hers on his chest. Justice will come, Marco said. The D.A. already has enough to put him away forever. And the families he betrayed, they'll make sure prison isn't comfortable. Patricia's hands moved again, and this time Nancy's translation made Carlos's eyes close. Your mother says your father would be proud. That you protected family. that you trusted when it mattered, that you're the man he always hoped you'd become. When Carlos opened his eyes again, they were wet. He signed to his mother, "I miss him." "I know. So do I. Every day." Patricia's signs were tender. "But he's not truly gone. He lives in you, in your strength, in your love for family." The monitors beeped steadily. Outside the window, New York woke to another day, oblivious to the small miracle happening in this hospital room, a family fractured by violence, learning to heal through the language of hands and hearts. "Nancy," Carlos's voice drew her attention back to him. "When I'm out of here, there's something I need to do. Something I need to show you." "What?" His smile was small but genuine. How to properly thank someone who saved everything that matters. Nancy's cheeks flushed. "You don't need to." "I do." His fingers tightened around hers. "You walked into a world that should have terrified you. You stood beside my mother when bullets were flying. You ran into danger to save us." He paused. "The least I can do is show you that not everything in my world is darkness." Patricia's signs were emphatic, insistent. Nancy laughed despite everything. "Your mother says if you don't do right by me, she'll disown you." "She's not wrong." Carlos's expression turned serious. "Nancy Rivera, you changed everything. The question is, will you let me show you what that change looks like?" In that moment, with Patricia beaming and Marco pretending not to smile, and Carlos looking at her like she was the answer to questions he hadn't known to ask, Nancy made a choice, not to stay invisible, not to run from connection, but to trust the language they'd all learned together, the language of survival, of loyalty, of finding family in the most unexpected places. "Yes," she whispered. "Show me." 6 weeks later, La Bella Notte reopened with a difference that made the evening news. The same crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, the same marble floors gleamed beneath expensive shoes. But now, scattered throughout the dining room, were tables where deaf children and their families sat, menus translated into sign language, waitstaff moving with practiced fluency in both spoken and signed conversation. Nancy stood near the entrance in a simple black dress, nothing borrowed this time, purchased with her first paycheck from her new position as La Bella Notte's community outreach director. She watched families laugh and communicate, watched children's faces light up when servers signed their orders back perfectly, and felt something warm unfold in her chest. "You did this." Patricia appeared beside her, elegant in emerald silk, her hands moving with pride. "This beautiful thing. You made my son see beyond his world." Nancy signed back. "We did this together. Your vision, his resources, my voice, our family," Patricia corrected gently. "That's what we've become." The word family still felt too large for Nancy to fully accept. But she was learning that family wasn't always blood. Sometimes it was built from sign language and shared danger and the choice to see each other truly. The front door opened, and the restaurant fell into its familiar hush. Carlos Marcello entered, his arm still in a sling but healing, his tailored suit perfect, his presence commanding every eye in the room. But when his gaze found Nancy, something in his expression softened the dangerous edge, giving way to something warmer. He crossed directly to her, ignoring the whispers and stares. "Miss Rivera," he said formally, though his eyes held humor. "I believe you promised me a tour of your program." "Mr. Marcello." Nancy fought a smile. "I believe you're supposed to be resting that shoulder. I've rested enough." He offered his good arm. "Besides, my mother threatened to disown me if I missed tonight." Patricia's signs were emphatic. "I did not threaten. I promised." Carlos laughed, a sound Nancy was still getting used to, still treasuring. "See? Threats. Come, show me what you've built." They walked through the restaurant together, Nancy explaining each element of the program, how they'd partnered with schools for the deaf, how they'd trained the entire staff in basic sign language, how they'd created a space where communication wasn't a barrier but a bridge. At a corner table, a little girl maybe 7 years old signed excitedly to her parents about the pasta. When she saw Nancy, her hands moved in greeting. Nancy signed back, asking about her meal, and the child's face glowed with joy. Carlos watched the exchange, something shifting in his expression. When they moved away, he spoke quietly. "You know what I see when I watch you with them?" "What?" "My mother, 20 years ago, before the world made her believe her silence was a burden." He paused at a window overlooking the city. "You gave her back her voice, Nancy, not by making her speak, but by reminding everyone else to listen." Nancy's throat tightened. She gave me something too. A place. A purpose. A family, Carlos finished. He turned to face her fully, his dark eyes intense. Nancy Rivera, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it completely before you respond. Her heart hammered. Okay. The night you signed to my mother, I thought you were an anomaly, a curiosity, maybe a threat. He smiled slightly. I ran background checks, planned to distance you, protect her from whatever angle you were working. I wasn't working any angle. I know. That's what I'm trying to tell you. His good hand found hers. You weren't working anything. You were just kind. Genuinely, impossibly kind, in a world where kindness is usually a con. And it broke something open in me, made me see that my protection was becoming my mother's prison, that my power was isolating the person I loved most. Nancy couldn't breathe, couldn't look away. You taught me a different language, Carlos continued. Not just sign language, though that too, but the language of trust, of letting people in, of believing that not everyone wants something from you. He paused. And somewhere in those lessons, I fell in love with the teacher. The words hung between them like a confession and a question and a promise all at once. Carlos, Nancy's voice shook. You don't have to say anything now. I know this world is complicated, dangerous, not what you signed up for when you poured wine at a table. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. But I'm asking if you're willing, let me show you that it can also be beautiful. Let me prove that what we've built is real. Nancy thought about invisible girls and foster homes and a life spent hiding. Thought about Patricia's joy and sign language bridges and the way Carlos looked at her like she was the bravest thing he'd ever seen. I'm terrified, she admitted. Good. So am I. Your world almost killed me. I know. And I'll spend every day making sure it never comes close again. Your mother will have opinions about this. Carlos laughed. My mother's been planning our wedding since the night you first signed to her. Despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the impossibility of it all. Nancy smiled. Then she signed, her hands moving deliberately so he could follow. Then I guess we shouldn't disappoint her. Carlos's expression transformed. Without thinking, he pulled Nancy close, careful of his healing shoulder, and kissed her. Not possessively or desperately, but with the gentle certainty of someone who'd finally found what he'd been searching for. When they pulled apart, the restaurant erupted in applause. Patricia stood at their table, tears streaming down her face, her hands signing rapid-fire joy that Nancy would translate later. What did she say? Carlos asked, smiling against Nancy's hair. Nancy watched Patricia's signs, her own eyes wet. She says, welcome to the family. She says you spoke the only language that could reach her heart and mine. Carlos held her closer. She's not wrong. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos, sirens and traffic, and a million stories unfolding in the darkness. But inside La Bella Notte, under chandeliers that glittered like frozen stars, a different story was being written. A story of a shy waitress who became a voice for the voiceless. A mafia boss who learned that strength came in many languages. A deaf mother who reminded them both that silence could speak louder than words. And a family born not from blood but from choice, from danger survived and kindness offered, and the revolutionary act of truly seeing one another. Nancy Rivera had spent her life trying to stay invisible. But standing in Carlos Marcello's arms, surrounded by the laughter of families who finally felt heard, she understood something profound. Sometimes, the greatest power comes not from disappearing, but from refusing to hide. From speaking in whatever language necessary until the world has no choice but to listen. The chandeliers glittered above them. And for the first time in her life, Nancy didn't feel invisible at all. Thanks for sticking with this story till the end. If you enjoyed it, you're going to love the next one. It's packed with unexpected turns and heartfelt moments. Click the image on your screen to keep the journey going, and make sure to hit subscribe for more amazing stories. Drop a comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I can't wait to see what you think.